Hi, I'm Justin. Thank you for coming. My question is, when it was just the two of you, how did you guys work with the dynamic of one of you kind of studying economics and one of you being more the tech guy? How were you able to communicate? How did you divide up the work when it really became heavy on one side or the other?
It's a lot of people ask that question. I think that the simple truth is I think we each take a lot of interest in what the other person does, and we don't come to the table completely blind. You know those sort of like classic co-founders, there's one guy over here, one guy over here, and there's no overlap. There's literally like absolute no sort of concentric circle. We're sort of the opposite. We get into each other's shit on everything. And though Dan sort of stands for his technical principles, and invariably I'll say that's what we're doing, and I stand for my sort of product principles and how I think about marketplaces. And once in a while I'll have the gavel, but I think it's actually that medium that is really the important piece. And when I see sort of the stark contrast between founders, sometimes it's very worrisome. It's very worrisome.
And I'll say most early stage companies, most people advise having co-founders because it's sort of, you're compressing so much work into such a small time that without having a partner, without having someone to work with, it's just too much to do. So most people do advise having a partner, but then most companies fail because of co-founder disagreements. Mm-hmm. And I think somehow we actually just naturally work together really well, so we haven't had most of the big disagreements. We disagree on lots of particular things, but we know how to communicate and to resolve that. And we don't, we each know our world well enough that we can speak with authority in that space. I think there was a... Yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. What exactly does your guys' day-to-day look like, and how many businesses or whatnot have you guys started in the past 12 years?
So Dan and I have invested in probably a dozen companies. We've started 3 companies, and to varying levels of success. All of them have been rocket rides. Some of the rockets sort of went the other direction at one point. My day-to-day is actually really, really simple. I walk in and say, what's the most important thing to do with my time right now? I try not to schedule a lot of meetings, and I try to focus on what I think is that sort of like key, that critical element that will sort of define my day. And sorry to quote a former Oregon football coach, Chip Kelly used to say, win the day. It's kind of cheesy, but I sort of walk into every day saying like, what do I need to do to make this company better and to make myself better and to be more effective? And when you frame your day that way, that's fantastic. And one quick anecdote is like, please never be the people that are sort of the type that take 100 meetings per day and think that that's productivity. Like, you'll very quickly learn that there's lots of people that carry papers around and they'll say they're so busy. The most effective people in the world are the ones that sort of dictate their own schedule. And I've been caught in that trap before, not doing that, and it's a huge mistake.
I don't know.
Yep.
What's the question? That's one.
How you doing? My name is Jason. Brian, you mentioned never, what was it?
He'll make up a new card.
Never compromise.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that if you're going to do something great, you have to have a declarative idea, and you have to stand for that idea. And it's very easy to get pushed off it. Someone will say, that's not a good idea. Your friend will be like, I'd never use that app, or why would you start that stupid company? And there have been hard days. Dan and I have looked at each other and seen some really smart people more or less shit on us. And if we hadn't had the fortitude to kind of just keep going, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. And I think that when you 100% wholeheartedly believe in a vision, that doesn't mean you can't innovate, that doesn't mean you can't change, that doesn't mean you can't become totally evolutionary, but you still have to stand for something. And most entrepreneurs, you throw 100 of them in the room, 98 of them don't stand for anything. They stand for making money. And that's just not a core principle that we would ever guide ourselves, toward.
Two more quick ones, and then if Dan and Ryan can hang out for a couple of
Yep.
minutes, we'll have to meet them.
Happy to.
Who hasn't asked a question? Have you asked one? All right. Represent this side with something good. And say your name too. If you have to go, sneak out quietly, thanks. It's my bad for going late, I'm sorry.
Just wondering, this is my first time seeing your website, so I was wondering, how do people that are not famous monetize on the website?
We have a self-serve platform. Anyone can put a piece of premium content out there and price it and put it into their social graph. Like anything, if you don't have density or nodes around, your work, you're going to have to start from scratch, hustle, figure out how to sort of build, an organic marketing campaign. So there is no easy answer. If I had an easy answer, I'd probably be at work right now, monetizing hundreds of millions of people's content. But,
There's no magic road. Anything
Yeah.
that's about attention, it fundamentally is going to require work. You can lower the barriers, you can build the tools to let people generate their own traffic, but ultimately the creators are a big part of that.
And speaking of scale, what type of scale do you have to reach? What is sort of your target for this scale? What's the race to?
as big as we could possibly envision.
Yeah, just solve
Yeah.
people's problems, build bigger stuff, and keep thinking of ways to make it bigger. We never have numbers in mind.
Yeah, there's no numbers, but there's no reason why Disney can't be rebuilt. There's no reason why Warner Brothers can't be rebuilt. There's no reason why any of you can't do exactly what you want to do. I mean, you just have to think and sort of.
I just meant for chill. Like, where were you looking at in terms of scale? By the way,
Yeah.
hopefully you'll have 244 more people interested in chill.
We appreciate it.
The race to 15 million or whatever.
Hi, I'm Luke. I was wondering what was or when was the moment that you realized it was time to drop out of school?
He's a high school dropout
Yeah,
too, so you have to define.
we
You have to
didn't go back
define
through
what
all
year.
the story. So high school, I was working at NIH on like biomedical research for a bunch of years, and I'd always do that on the side. And finally, I was just much more interested in that. So I was pretty much spending all my time at NIH, and I think at some point, like the school said, you have too many unexcused absences. That's high school, though. I'm a middle school graduate, however. In college, I was working in this research group. We were working on social software for a whole bunch of time, and I was just excited about building some of it. And I sat down. My advisor is a guy named Andy Van Dam, who's a very famous computer scientist. And I kept saying, well, we'll build this and build this. And he said, you understand that there's no way you can get funding in the academic environment to do that. It's just not how this whole world works. Because I had always planned on being a computer science professor. And I just sort of said, I want to build it. And so I left and decided to build it. I don't know. Sometimes it takes a little bit of craziness there.
I'm sure your parents were thrilled.
We won't talk about that part.